on this computer. Yay, okay, recording in progress. All right, so we're on, I think, and it should be recording to my computer. So here's our youth safety refresher. Let's go to the introduction. So right now we're only 5, so this should go quick. My name is Victoria Grimmy, Vicky. I'm the group scoutmaster of the 64th Brandywine, and I'm gonna ask each of you to introduce yourself and tell me your role in the scout group, and so that we can move on from there. I think that's all we really need to know. So, Jeff, can you go next?
Sure, I'm Jeff Welch, and I'm the Pathfinder Scoutmaster.
Ooh, you've got someone else with you.
I snuck in by the side. I'm Riley, Scouter Yantar, and I am just a helper person in our group. I have often helped him with Timberwolves.
Yes.
Even though mine have both finally graduated up to Pathfinders.
All right, segue to Tim then, I guess.
Hello, I'm Tim Grimmy. I'm Akela of the 64th Brandywine Timberwolves.
And Akela is?
That's the section leader for the Wolves.
Okay. And Jim?
Hello, Jim Fogarty. So I'm the Otter leader.
Terrific. Now, each of you has assistant leaders too. We haven't seen them tonight, but hopefully they will get a chance to see this recording. So, and then we've got a new person with us. Sarah, are you there? Can respond?
I'm here, yeah. Sarah, I'm a total newbie. Rover and hopefully future leader when I get trained up and I know what I'm doing.
Lovely, lovely. Well, thank you for coming to this. This will be, you'll be our test subject on this training. So, okay, so our goals for this training are to remind rovers of their responsibility to keep you safe, to provide the proper language, to introduce group safety culture and give us all expectations of behavior, and to empower rovers so that they understand the appropriate behavior, inappropriate behavior. This is all for our own and our own children's protection. So that's just for the training. And then the guidelines for our training today, I just put in, we want to respect individual privacy. We may be talking about some things that happened in our past. We want to make sure to try and protect people's privacy during discussions if you're giving anecdotes. And we may discuss difficult topics, some things that are difficult to discuss. And if there's anything that comes up that you don't feel comfortable talking about, we could talk privately another time. Is there anybody here who has been through a similar sort of training, maybe outside of Scouts, for work or something like that? No? Cool, okay. Well, we'll all learn together. I put a screen in here to show you where you can find our national policies. Outdoor Service Guides has written these policies that I'm going to go over in this presentation, most of them. Some of them are specific to us. But there is a code of ethics and youth protection guidelines with an electronic communications addendum that you can find online. And when I send you all this slide, you'll be able to link through to it yourself when you look at this presentation. There's a criminal history check policy, which is really quite thorough. And when you read it, it gives you a lot of important information. So it's always good to know that. We have a camping intent policy, which is very specific. And a lot of that we're going to discuss tonight. And then there's safe swim guidelines, which we don't really discuss tonight because for the most part, many groups choose not to go swimming unless they're in a public place that has lifeguards and the kind of things that we need. So I'm not going to go through that specifically tonight, but it is available for you to read and we can talk about any questions you might have. All right, so I'm going to show, because every good presentation should start with a cool quote. I found a really cool quote that I've liked. The best way to make children good is to make them happy, Oscar Wilde said. And I thought that sort of our goal is to have fun in Scouts, and the best way to make them happy is to make sure that they're safe. So that's our plan. So the bulk of the presentation is about a culture of safety. That's what we want to encourage in our Scout group. We want everyone to be always conscious of safety of their kids. Well, we're always conscious of the safety of of our own kids. We want to add the whole group to our consciousness. We want to be aware of how to keep a larger group of kids safe. I only have one, I only have to watch one, but when I'm at a scout event, I'm watching, 10, 20, who knows, but we're all on this team. So I'm going to ask, I don't know, maybe Jeff to talk this, to read this part. Jeff is involved in regional volunteering for the Scout group. So I want to ask sort of other voices to come in here. So if you wouldn't mind, Jeff, reading this slide.
So people are probably aware, but I don't want to assume that other scouting organizations have had problems. They've been very prominent in the news where there were issues where children were abused by adults, and these were children in their care. And, in addition to being, of course, problematic organizationally, it's an absolutely horrible position to be in. It's a horrible thing to let happen to our kids. And we want to make sure that through building a strong culture of youth protection, we really don't give anybody who would think about harming our children in any of the various ways that they might get access to children through a scout group. We don't want to give them any place in our scout organization where they would have an opportunity to do those kinds of things. And a big part of the culture that Vicky's going to talk more about is if we all are very explicit about what we're doing to protect youth safety, and we all are holding each other accountable to those things and expecting those things of each other, then there is a lot fewer opportunities for people to do things that are inappropriate. We have never had an actual complaint of somebody in our scouting organization nationwide abusing a child or suspected of abusing a child. That said, we have had at least one person, a couple of people who have been dismissed because they had some red flag behaviors and refused to change those behaviors. This did not take place in the 64th Brandy line. This took place nationwide. But it was made very clear to them that they could not continue in these behaviors and continue as scout leaders in the outdoor service guides. And they refused to change their behavior, so they're no longer allowed to participate with the organization, which frankly, I'm very proud of. And I think that's exactly the kind of organization that we want to be. And so the message I think that the national organization is sending and that we can take for our own group is that if there is any kind of an issue where these policies are breached or people are behaving inappropriately with our children, we will respond swiftly and thoroughly, which means that we'll take immediate and effective action.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. I'm going to move to the next slide. Is that good, Jeff?
Yep.
This I've been instructed I should read. So I'll read this part and then I'll hand off some more after. The rights of children. Each child has a right to comfort, acceptance, and safety. They also have a right to be protected from abuse, and organization members, any registered adult member, rover, or non-rover adult part of the group, have an absolute obligation and responsibility to protect our youth. The following young people's rights are part of our core ethical fabric and should be protected at all times, including the right to be safe, to feel safe, to protect their own bodies, to refuse inappropriate touches or actions, to get help against bullies, to not keep secrets, to say no, to tell, and to be believed. So I think that's all pretty straightforward. And I love the way that that's written, honestly. So I don't have a break here, but if anybody has any questions about any of the meanings of those rights, we can bring it up right now. Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I think I'll just add that I think this already gets into the culture of it. It's one thing to be safe and it's another thing to feel safe.
Yes.
Part of the reason it's written separately is that the kids have to feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
And there's that, again, that's part of the culture, that they're allowed to say when they don't feel safe, even if we're like, it's fine, it's fine,
Yeah.
fine. The person's not trying to abuse you, he just
Right.
wants to put your backpack. They have to, that feeling of safety is, at the mental and emotional portion of it, as important as actual, you know, physical safety.
Yes.
So.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to move on to what I basically call the table of contents of this presentation. The bullet points that we're going to talk about to foster a culture of safety. The first two are pretty obvious. We're going to discuss policies and guidelines frequently. And I spend a lot of time doing that. I ask other leaders, hey, are we doing the right thing? What does this mean? So I want us to all be able to talk about that. And when we need clarification as leaders. We also need to meet new leaders and go over policy. Sometimes we bring in new leaders, like Sarah is a new leader, or a new rover at least, and hasn't had a BTC training yet. So this is another reason we want to try and go over this stuff right away, because honestly, it's the most serious and important stuff we need to share with new parents who come into the group. And then we want to understand consent, which I'm going to talk specifically about. We're going to exhibit appropriate boundaries with youth. And we'll talk about those things as well. Then we're going to practice two-person leadership, also called two-deep leadership, and we'll go into that. We have a tenting policy, and we must always adhere to it. And there's a lot of questions about it, so we'll talk about those tonight. Completing background clearances, of course, obviously very important. It's our backup, essentially, when we meet new people, to be sure that we're meeting people who have a good background to be around other kids. And then always following the rules, even when it's difficult to do so. That'll probably be a part of the wider discussion, because every time we talk about the rules, there's things that make them a little difficult. I should say the policies. There are things that might make them a little difficult. So we'll go over that. So I'm going to charge right into the third bullet point right now, consent. All right. Hey, Tim, you get to read now.
Consent means an adult or scout asks before they closely engage with another youth or adult. Consent looks like an adult asks for a scout's permission to interact with them beyond a basic conversation. Anytime one's personal space may be crossed, or in any interaction that warrants using your hands on another scout to render aid. This is in an emergency for first aid. This is fixing their necker, helping them put in a tent peg, anything that you're going to come in close contact. You've got to get permission and make sure that they are aware and would like you to help them.
I have a little note here to myself that says, if you instill a culture of consent, things like tickling, fixing a necker around a neck, inappropriate comments or jokes, adult-child teasing, singling out of one scout, all become very apparent. Not only are they apparent, but the group is empowered to address this inappropriate behavior. It's not in line with our group culture to override a scout's consent, and anyone doing so should feel comfortable bringing it up. I want the kids to tell me when they don't feel safe, like Amber was saying. It's the feeling. So on the next screen, there are some examples. We talked about a couple of these. Can I give you a high five? I mean, certainly now that we're wearing masks and we don't touch anybody because of COVID, all this is happening. Like, can we touch your elbow? Can we, is it okay if I show, this is interesting, these ones that say, if it's okay to show the pack what you're working on, or can I take a picture of you? Some of these aren't touching, but they allow the kid to say no. They allow the youth to exhibit agency over their behavior, over what goes on. Can anybody else think of any examples? Feel free to chime in. I think it's pretty straightforward when you're with other kids, particularly when they're not, friends of family, you don't know their boundaries. You just have to ask.
Are there any exceptions to these rules?
I imagine in an emergency, if a kid, is falling down the mountain or something like that. What do you guys think?
Yeah, that's the only example I came up with.
Yeah.
About to fall into the fire, or you know, on fire or something like that, you need to
cut
take swift and
themselves,
immediate action.
Right.
Yeah.
When you
Pulling
take
a scout off of another scout, like you don't need permission to. I ran into that in a playground once. There was a kid and he was on top of my kid, and it was like and the other mom was really upset with me, but I needed to protect my kid. So if there's another scout who's being in an interaction with another scout that you can't stop verbally, which at the time the children were like 3, so not mostly dealing with kids that small, but I think in a scout on scout interaction, if there's a problem, and it's not working verbally,
right.
Yeah, and I think one of the things for me to remember is do that with my own kids, and set the example, and make it uniform across the entire group.
Yeah.
We try to do that at home anyway, but there's a lot of things you take for granted, especially like, hey, tighten your backpack. I would just walk up and do that for my kids, but set the example, and that's tricky when it's your own kids.
Right.
But,
yeah, and it's always hard when they're not listening. You just know they're not hearing you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this one leads a little bit into the next subject, which is appropriate boundaries. Jim, you want to take this one?
Sure. So sometimes we see leaders engaging with youth in a way that works for them outside of scouting. For example, a leader might know from their family relationship or friendship that a scout really loves to be tickled, and it can get them out of a bad mood. This leader must step back from their relationship with this child. Once you've put on your Rover uniform and the meeting begins, you are an authority figure that represents an organization, our organization. You must divorce yourself from personal relationships you might have with your scouts or scout families.
Yeah, it's not so much that you have to be unfriendly. It's that there's a role there. I think of it a little bit like when you have work friends. You might have work friends you go out with for drinks after work, and that's one relationship, and then you go back to work and you're working, and you don't it's a whole different behavior.
Or in a more cut and dry way, if your two families are friends, your friends might trust you to watch their child without another adult present, but it's not appropriate to do that as a scout leader.
Right. So I have another examples here. Things you ask yourself to make sure that your behavior is appropriate. Like I said, am I respecting the autonomy and consent of the child? Anytime you want that child to do something and they're not, listening or complying, it's tricky, but I don't really have a good example. Can somebody else think of a situation that, other than constantly asking, can I have a high five, or can I, I sometimes have kids when the kids were Otters, I had one kid who was a real hugger, and I like that. That's nice. But it made him physical with everyone, and not everybody liked it, and you could tell. So I told him what was to make it fun. If he wanted to give somebody a hug, he had to ask them, but he didn't have to ask them out loud. He could ask them with a nonverbal, I would like a hug, throwing your arms out and seeing if someone is willing to get a hug. So,
that's good to know, because my kid is exactly that way. He'll just invade all the personal space.
Yes. And that's, again, we all have friends who are huggers before you're ready to be a hugger. All right. Is that good? Should we move on, guys? All right. We'll go to the next one. Next one's a little bit longer. This one's two-person leadership. I don't know. Amber, you want to read this one?
Sure. Two-person leadership, TPL, also called too deep leadership. Often people in our organization just call it too deep. Do you have too deep? Or who's your too deep? Stuff like that. All activities must have at least 2 adult leaders present at all times. Rover Scout leaders are preferred, but non-Rover adult support volunteers are acceptable as they are also background checked. That's true in our group. Mm-hmm. I'm also active with the national leadership, and that's not always true, but the part about having it being 2 adult leaders is that at least anybody who's registered has that backstop of background check. That only checks your criminal history, But it does at least give us that backstep of assurance, and is the second adult person. The fundamental rule is that you are never to be alone with any child who is not your child. Of course, this also follows for if it's a child for whom you're the guardian. We're not going to get into exact parental relationships, but if you're the person who's functioning as the caregiver for that child, obviously, then you can be alone with the child. And the unfortunate truth of that is that if a parent or a caregiver has access to the child, we as an organization are not going to change the amount of access that that adult has with that child.
Right.
We are a leveling, we need to ensure a level playing field for every child who's not your child.
Yeah.
To be at least 2 adults. And I don't know if you have a separate slide about this, about who counts as 2 adult leaders. Jeff and I are 1 person because we are a married couple.
Yeah, I didn't put a slide in about that. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, that's a really tough part of the rule for certain small outings. I know Tim and Vicky, they're also both registered, and often if one can go to a scouting thing and they need a second leader, like, oh, the other person could just come. But again, dealing with actual realities, spousal or long-term partnered units in the world of at least sexual abuse, but also physical and emotional abuse, will tend to act as 1 unit.
Right.
A child that is, we have 2 children together, Jeff and I, and any child who is not our child, we need to have an outside of our relationship person there with us.
It's been a good choice then for you to stay involved with Timberwolves.
Yeah.
So I am not the only one there.
Yeah.
When I go in to fill in as an assistant leader if I need to. So.
And I think it's worth mentioning that that this policy protects the adult leaders as it protects the children, because it always makes sure that there's another adult witness to any interaction that you have with a child.
Right.
So there's a much lower risk of a misunderstanding getting out of hand.
Or someone seeing something. Oh, Jeff was with that kid. Yeah, but Jim was also there. Anything along those lines where it feels like everything is absolutely on the up and everything is in the open. In people who are not related in relationship to the youth.
Well, I have some examples because really that's probably the best way to talk about this as to what you do in this situation. So I'm going to jump through those. So the first one is an hour before a meeting, your co-leader cancels. So what do we do? Hey, Tim, what do we do?
Scrambling, hit that
Scrambling, yeah.
Try and find another adult leader to show up or fill in, or unfortunately you'll have to notify everybody that the event cannot continue without the appropriate 2 deep leadership.
Right. So here's the answer that was in our documentation. In order to continue the meeting, you have to find another leader, and it has to be a part of a team. It can be a hassle, but it also is another encouragement to have many assistant leaders, like so that people can roll with it. You have 3 people who normally show. You can just deputize someone who's there to be the assistant leader that day. Even if the meeting is planned and you do not have another rover, you must cancel the meeting. Now it says rover here, but again, we have those 2 categories. In our group, we have allowed the non-rover adult support volunteer, who is also background checked, to serve as your second in a pinch. And thankfully that is generally the case. I mean, we almost always have some extra parents who have gone through the process in order to attend things with their kids. So I'll move on to the next one. If nobody has any questions. All right, example 2. A scout needs a ride to the meeting and you've offered to pick them up. Definitely have done this. So this is a little trickier. Anybody want to tackle? What does our official documentation say about giving rides to scouts.
Officially, that's a no.
Let's see what I found. You should avoid driving with a scout in your car unless you have two rovers in the car with you. Now, of course, in this usual situation, it'd be you and your spouse, which, as Amber said, is probably doesn't qualify. You must also have your child in the car. So it's you, a non-related rover, and your child. So as you can see, carpooling is tricky. We never drive alone in a car with a child who is not our child. That is the same as the previous rule. We make a plan to meet the other rovers as soon as you can after pickup, and you can caravan. We have been counting caravanning as too deep leadership. So if I'm driving along, there's another rover following me with another kid, that is too deep, but you must pull over at the same time. You can't do separate gas station stops. So it's tricky. It's been tricky for us to offer carpooling of any kind. We don't have a van. So that does mean that we expect people generally to drive themselves to our activities. Well, not the Otters, of course, but. All right.
Line of sight is the rule. We got to have eyes on each other.
Yeah. All right. I'll move on to 3. 3 is a scout needs help getting a change of clothes out of the van in the parking lot, but your co-leader is busy. I've had that sort of thing happen before. Anybody else, where the kid needs to run off and get something, do something, but you don't want them not to have an adult with them?
I think you'd have to wait till the co-leader's available.
Yeah, or another scout.
Yeah, it says you must wait until they aren't busy. Then you can walk to the van you can't walk to the van with the scout alone. Again, line of sight. If it's somewhere close, you could send the scout alone. You could send the scout with a buddy if the scout is old enough and you feel like they wouldn't get lost wandering off. I tend to do that. Like I say to younger kids, if you have to go to the bathroom, take a buddy with you. If the buddy is another youth scout in their section, that's as safe as can be if they can see where they're going and we can see them. I've had situations where they're out of sight and then I usually grab the parent, like that scout's parent, like this is you, I need you to handle that. All right. Any questions about those examples? All right, let's jump over to electronic communications. We discovered with COVID, when we were doing much more online activity, and now that we have more middle school and high school scouts in our group, that we needed to have some sort of policy about how these scouts could get in touch with their leaders. So we and the Outdoor Services Guides developed a policy that is an under age 12 and over age 12 policy, essentially. Tim, do you want to read this?
Under the age of 12, no adult leader or adult scout shall communicate directly via mail, text, or similar technology with any youth scout member. All communications will be directed to a parent or responsible guardian. For ages 12 to 17, adult leaders or scouts may communicate directly via mail, email, text, or similar technology with youth scout members, but all messages must also be copied, carbon copied, group text, etc., to the youth scout's parent or responsible guardian.
So the idea is we are never communicating directly with a scout without their parent being aware of everything that we're talking about. These are generally emails about when the next meeting is, or what activities they're planning to do in the next meeting. I don't know that we haven't addressed social media, but we don't generally, I don't think any of us use social media with our scouts in order, to be safe. You wouldn't friend a kid who's on Facebook, essentially.
It's just scout to scout, no leader to scout.
Yeah. We've set up the scouts with some Discord chat so that they could talk to one another, but we're not a part of that. None of the leaders are on those servers.
And I've had situations where I've had scouts email me at my Scoutmaster address without CCing their parent. Mm-hmm. And I'll always reply and add their parent. And the first thing I write is, you need to include your parent when you're writing to me. That said, here's the answer to your question.
Yeah, our extended policy is a little longer. I was shortening it for the slide, but you're absolutely right, because just like when you reply all accidentally, sometimes you don't reply all when you should. So so I have a little spot here for any further discussion of two-person leadership that you might want to bring up. Anybody have any questions, declarations?
I ran into issues with this when I was doing so many Zoom meetings with the Otters, because, you know, with Otters, it's a unique situation. The parents are always there.
Right.
So, you know, at least helping them out. But then there were times where some of the kids were old enough and they were able to use their iPads and all that other kind of stuff by themselves. Now, fortunately, in those cases, for as best as I can recall, I had another leader. But, you know, it was tough, even in those situations, to make sure I had somebody else with me as to do two-person deep, you know, and you think, oh, it's a Zoom meeting. Well, it's just as bad as potential as anything else, you know? So yeah, even virtual, you know, and who knows what we're going to end up going back to, you know, who knows where we're going, you know, or if we just add virtual to,
we might have to be more flexible again, you know, and
it's something to keep in mind and make sure when you're scheduling things that you have at least one, if not two people in reserve.
Right.
Because, you know, that situation of the co-leader bailing is a real one.
Yes, yes.
He was kind enough to be my co-leader on several Zoom sessions this past year. And I set up in Zoom the waiting room feature so nobody could come in without being admitted. And I would not admit any youth scouts into the meeting until Vicki and I were both there.
Yeah, Jeff would send me a desperate text if I was a few minutes late. You're coming, right? You're coming. They're all in the waiting room. I'm like, yes, I'm here.
I have a similar desperation with me, but I'm also often available. And I've never led Otters, but I'm a registered background check, two-person option for anybody but Jeff.
We should make sure that everybody has everyone's immediate, like, quick contact information, so that in those cases,
that's a good idea, because I'd always be willing to hop on too. So,
all right.
Good.
Anybody have any questions? All right. Well, move on to camping and tenting. Much of this is what we've been practicing, but I wasn't always as clear. So I tried to be as very clear in our slides about what we're expecting in this policy, this section. So again, we have another very like specific, this is the big rule, the one that always must be followed, and everything follows from this rule. And that rule is that no adult, rover or otherwise, shall share a tent with any child who is not their own child. Many campouts are family campouts, and we expect families to come together, but you cannot have a child in your tent as an adult if that child is not your own or you're not the guardian of that child.
And share a tent doesn't mean for the night. It means be in a tent together.
At all.
Yes, because once the tent is closed, you are no longer, you don't have two deep leadership anymore, frankly. All right, so these slides are all broken down by section so that we can see what our policy is for each age group. So I'm going to ask each of the leaders for each section to read them, and then maybe talk a little bit about sort of what that means to their group, and when we push the boundaries, or if there's any difficulty in with those policies. So the first one is Otters. So Jim, if you would read this for us.
All right. Now, Otters are easier because Otters must camp with their parents, guardians, like family camping. Older Otters may share a tent with other scouts who share their gender identity, but parents, guardians must camp on site in separate tents away from them.
I should have probably rewritten. I should have rewritten that, and it should say older Otters may share a tent with other Otters, right? Isn't that what we've been stressing? Okay, so like two friends can share a tent together, but mom and dad need to be in their own mom and dad tent.
Right. So they're the same age group, but you know, and the key is the gender identity too.
Right.
I think that's really important to stress. But yep, that's it. That's all I have.
Yeah, that's an easy one. Any questions? All right, let's move on to Timberwolves.
All right. Ages 8 to 10, when parents really want to get them out of the house and on their own. It is preferred that Timberwolves camp in distinct Timberwolf camping area. In the Timberwolf camp, the cubs may tent by themselves with their rover parents or guardians, or with other Timberwolves who share their gender identity. Non-rovers should not camp in the Timberwolf area. When there is no distinct Timberwolf camp, Timberwolves may choose to share a tent with their parents, guardians, and family camp. We have had independent Timberwolves come. We've had several female cubs that their parents were not campers. And we generally at the 64th don't get enough Timberwolves for a Timberwolf specific area, or we don't have enough room where we camp to have them all together. So we typically would put them in between a couple of families of Timberwolves. We try and keep the Otters together, the Wolves together, and the older Scouts way far away. But at the times that we've had the independent Scouts come, we, sometimes you have to help them roll out their bed, or, hey, I got to get up in the middle of the night to go to the restroom. They either have to go with a friend, or you have to get up, both of you, to go help them out.
Mm-hmm. By the time they're 8 or 10, if they're camping on their own, I have found that they feel fairly confident going to a visible restroom area and coming back. At least in our experience, but each kid is different. So yeah, so it's either a 1-person trip, a 2-scout trip, or a 3 adults and a scout, or 2 adults and a scout.
Yeah.
All right. Any questions? I'm going to move on to Pathfinders. In our increasing efforts to get people to be scouts to be more independent, the Pathfinders have slightly more permissive rules. Well, not except for they don't break the rule.
Pathfinders should, we moved up from, or encouraged to should, have a separate Pathfinder camp area. Pathfinders can tent alone or with other Pathfinders who share the same gender identity. And just to be super clear, Pathfinders shall not share a tent with Timberwolves or Otters. No adults, rover or otherwise, should camp in Pathfinder camp. Adult leaders should camp within calling distance, but not within Pathfinder camp. And when we talk about Pathfinder camp versus family camp or rover camp, we're talking about measuring it in feet away, like tens of feet or a couple hundred feet or a few hundred feet. We're not talking about miles away out of sight, completely on their own wilderness. But there should be a clear demarcation. This is the Pathfinder tenting area, and any adult who shows up in that area should look really out of place, because there shouldn't be any adults in that area. And if a Pathfinder wishes to share a tent with a parent or guardian, the Pathfinder may camp with their parent or guardian in family camp. The parent or guardian does not get to join the Pathfinder camp.
Right. So we've had families that had, say, 1 Otter and 1 Timberwolf, and they would choose to set up in family camp with majority Otters, because the Timberwolf, if they have 1 tent for the 4 to share or something like that, or if they have a Pathfinder and an Otter, mom and dad are over with their Otter, Pathfinder is off on his own in a separate tent, or sharing a tent with another Pathfinder.
And it can be really good natured. It doesn't have to be overly serious, but part of our culture of consent, it's very typical once you set up a Pathfinder camp for the Pathfinders to have some authority and consent over adults entering that area. And so you stand at the edge of the area if you need to come in for a reason. Obviously, if you don't need to come in, you just go over there and say, hey, can you guys come to the campfire? But if you do need to go in for some reason, you can stand at the edge and say, permission to enter Pathfinder camp. And the Pathfinders usually are tickled to death and will give you permission, and you go in, and that's fine. But again, it reinforces the culture of consent, the culture of youth safety, and
the culture of independence. It's their Pathfinder camp is their camp.
Yes. Yeah, when we were discussing this and how to write this out, I was that was the idea, is you're progressively trying to give the youth more independence and control over their own camping and how they like to do it. I've seen it in large Pathfinder campouts. It's impressive. It's really fun when there's say a Pathfinder / rover camp, and there's 2 separate camps. Like they just do their own thing, and they're only over if we have extra marshmallows. That's the only reason they come over to rover camp.
And then they're all over very quick.
All right, I'm going to move to a couple more general things about camping. I made a specific type of slide to indicate things that we do in the 64th Brandywine that has been our policy. So when we started camping, we didn't have as many rovers as we used to have, as we have now. So, but we had lots of parents who wanted to go camping with their kids, and we love that. So the safest way we found to make sure that all the adults on site could act in an emergency in a way to keep our culture safe was to make sure that every adult that attends a camp out had a background check. And so that means that I approach every parent who signs up to go camping with us, and I say, please, can you sign up and be our non-rover adult support volunteer? And that basically is that $20 membership level that just pays for a background check. So all I need to do is get them to sign up. They're a part of our group, and they do a background check that lasts for a year. That's good for a year. So they're a member of our group. They do the criminal background check and the child abuse history clearance, all the stuff that's involved in the background check that OSG does. Now we also in Pennsylvania have background checks that people who want to volunteer in the school have to get. And so those background checks are very thorough as well. And so we discovered there were a lot of parents who said, hey, I did these background checks for school. And so we call them the 3-part state mandated clearances for volunteers with children. And we have accepted those if they're provided to me as in lieu of a OSG membership, because that means that person has also gone through a rigorous background check. So I collect all that so that I can confirm that everyone who's on site when we have a camp out has been background checked, every adult on site.
The only vulnerability is that the school ones are good for 3 years, right?
5 years, actually.
5 years.
5 years, yeah.
So the OSG is a little bit more thorough because it's an annual, but depending on the status of the scouts moving in and out of the organization, we can't accept the state mandated checks.
Right. Yes, Jeff.
And just and as a reminder for folks who have not necessarily done this, this is another example of where we sometimes have to follow the rules even though they're inconvenient. For example, the Pathfinders often have an early fall camp out, and one of the things that we have to do is cross-check all the parents and rovers who have signed up to go on that early fall campout, which is typically before we renew memberships for the year, and make sure that nobody's membership and background check have expired.
Yes, there's a little bit of scrabbling. But there's a detailed page on the website explaining it, and I talk a little bit about it later when I talk about background checks, so we can either answer questions later or maybe we'll hit those questions when we come back to it. So anybody have any camping or tenting policy questions? Any stories, concerns? All right. Well, I'll jump into the segue into the background checks and clearances. I put this in, this wasn't in the original training, but I thought we ought to talk about it a little bit because it is it's paperwork, but it is our way of protecting the group and protecting the national organization. When people join, they have a background check run on them. That is a purchase product, right? From a contractor, a third party, exactly. They take the information that we provide them and they run a bunch of databases. And that is basically the way we've been getting these things completed each year. So actually I wanted to ask, maybe either Jeff or Amber could talk a little bit about this and about, I know Jeff was involved in the way that new scout groups come into OSG. I didn't really discuss it too much here because I knew our audience was just within our own group, but maybe you could talk a little bit about the process of onboarding a new group and how much goes into getting a group up to speed nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Vicki's laid it out here, but to flesh it in a little bit. So I'm the Northeast Regional Commissioner. It's my job, among other things, to vet leaders who are interested in starting a brand new OSG group. And we have a higher bar for starting a new group and giving them a charter than even simply, or even then getting a new leader in who needs to be background checked and trained. So to start a new OSG group, somebody has to apply. And as part of that application, they go through an interview with me, and they also have to provide 3 references. And I will tell you that I check all of everybody's references that they give, and typically have an extensive phone call with each of their references, digging for any information that might indicate that this person would be a bad fit for working with youth, or problematic in some other way. If they're coming to us from another scouting organization, I always ask that at least one of those references be someone who worked with them in their previous scouting organization, whether another leader or preferably somebody from their district or their council, who can talk to us about what it was like to work with them and any concerns that they might have. Then in order to start a group, of course, they have to have the criminal background checks for at least 2 leaders so that we know that they can provide 2 deep leadership. At least the group scoutmaster needs to go through our formal Brown Seat training camp, which is a 2.5-day camp that we run a couple of times a year in each region typically, so that not only do we have the opportunity to make sure that they're trained on youth safety and inclusivity and other important issues around running a scout organization, but also we have a wide variety of regional leaders who can lay eyes on them, talk to them, spend the weekend camping with them, and give them any kind of last review to make sure that we feel that we're confident that they're up to the task, and not showing any warning flags that would make us consider not offering them a charter to start a youth organization in our name.
Yeah, it was a little bit of the Wild West when we joined, but since then we've perfected this process, I think, a bit.
Yeah, I'll say the typical, and most of this is, you know, just lag time and things, but typically it's 3 to 6 months to start in the OSG these days, at least in my experience.
Mm-hmm. So I think the next screen just says specifically everyone that's an adult leader over 18 plus years of age has this background check. It includes checking individuals' identity as a national and local search on sex offender registries and a local national search on criminal records. And all this information is, I think the next page probably tells you that all the criminal history checks are assessed in a fair, impartial, and confidential manner. And there is quite a good document explaining the criminal history check policy on the national website. So I don't know that we need to spend too much time on that. If you get parking tickets, that's not necessarily going to preclude you being a scout leader. So I'll jump onto here. This is where I discuss a little more about those PA history clearances. The PA, I call them, it's child abuse history, police criminal background check, and FBI criminal background check and fingerprinting. These are required by state law. I did a lot of research and discovered that this is actually something that even if you're a volunteer and not a paid staff member, these are things, if you work with children, you need to have these criminal checks done. I guess I should call them clearances. And we have a page that sort of describes them. They're not complicated. The first 2 can be done online fairly quickly. The FBI criminal background check costs money, but we will reimburse any leader that has to have it done. I've only ever had to reimburse somebody once. And
also they don't actually charge you if you haven't had it done for 5 years, or if you're doing it in order to be able to volunteer at your child's school.
I'm not sure. I think the main problem, schools have access to a back-end database that they can use to access your results, and I don't get those. So I think they have to go through sort of a different process. I have not had to do this recently because you're also waived from doing this if you've lived in Pennsylvania for at least 10 years. So there's just you don't have to have it done at all because they count the criminal background check from Pennsylvania should cover anything they're worried about.
Well, to add to what Amber is saying, some school districts will give you copies to share with other groups that you might be a volunteer as a part of.
Yes. I have said to everybody who has them done, like, keep your own copy, give a copy to me, and you can show this to anybody that you've already had it done. So any background check questions anybody might have at this point? It's all paperwork. All right, I put in a slide here to talk about a culture of safety during COVID-19 because it seemed like a good place to break for it. Unfortunately, I can't put a lot of policies here because those are real flexible at this point. We have been very good in the culture of safety has made it so that we as leaders only want to scout in person if it's safe. So we're doing our very best to make sure that we're aware of what's going on locally with COVID transmissions and results. And so we've actually met many times over the last year and a half to discuss what we feel safe doing. We have decided this fall to try and go back to what is similar to our pre-COVID activity level. But if we find that these recent numbers in the last 2 weeks have been a little alarming, we may have to back off of those ideas. But we will be as flexible as we can to protect our leaders and our members, our Scout youth. And that may mean changes to, we may require masks. At this point, that's what we're doing. We are asking everyone to mask when we meet in person. We may have stepped up cleaning and hygiene expectations. And we may eventually, well, we may, and cross your fingers, we won't have to restrict our in-person activities depending on what the numbers look like in the state or locally. So thankfully we're in a place where our numbers look good for now. So we're crossing our fingers that what we're seeing climb now will drop quickly. So
we're across the borders with the neighboring states as we had to.
Yeah, at one point we were restricting, we restricted from crossing the border. I mean, it's not like there wasn't checkpoints or anything, but we realized we wanted to be safe.
No, I think at that time we were following state mandated travel restrictions.
Yes.
Yep.
So all of us are a little news happy about this. Everybody's sharing what they heard in the most recent story. Jeff finds a great new website, shares it with us.
I don't know about happy.
Yeah, I don't know about happy, exactly. All right. Okay.
Smiling and whistling.
I'm running a little long, but this part is important. I don't want to rush too much through it. So we're going to talk a little bit about abuse and recognizing and preventing abuse. So I put in here instead of discussing a bunch of facts, let's talk a little bit about the things that we've already talked about, hopefully a lot of things that we are doing to prevent abuse. As Scouts, it's our responsibility to keep an eye on our kids, even when they're not with us. If we notice things going on, we need to protect them. So this is the time we're going to talk, this is the difficult stuff. So I want everybody to feel comfortable talking about it. But what I hope we've already been talking about are the things that we can do to help prevent abuse. But the main thing is recognizing it and then knowing what steps to take next. So we're going to talk about those. So this part, I'm sorry, somebody want to say something? I moved forward a little bit. Okay. All right. So recognizing abuse, we have a list of red flags and I put them all, the ones that were discussed, all on these sheets. So Amber, would you start? Maybe the first 3 points?
Yeah, if an adult consistently singles out a specific youth to help them with physical or other tasks, an adult develops an outside relationship with a youth, contacts them outside of Scouts via text or email or chat. An adult and a Scout have inside jokes or seem to have a friendship beyond a typical Scout leader relationship. And that goes back to the kids that your family is friends with outside of Scouts. Mm-hmm. It's kind of funny, locally, I've met friends that were now family friends with outside of our scouting group. And I might have jokes with that kid or inside knowledge of what they've been up to or an insider secret funny friendship handshake or whatever, but we can't do those things at Scouts because if that's not a relationship that's on the up, and it's not a relationship I have with all of the Scouts. Mm-hmm. But for one thing, it's unfair to the other Scouts, and for another thing, that's a sign of a relationship that's going beyond the bounds of what's appropriate. Anything that you don't share with, would you care to share with the group? If you can't share it with the group, there's a secret.
Yes.
At some level. And it might, in a different context, it could be a fun secret. Oh, we both know that joke.
And we want behaviors like this to stand out.
Yeah.
Yes. So Jeff, you want to take the next 3, I guess?
Sure. An adult consistently crosses boundaries established by the group. I think this is a really important one. And it kind of goes to what I talked about earlier in terms of people that have been asked to leave the organization because they would not follow the norms of youth safety that have been established by OSG.
Right.
An adult hugs scouts or finds ways to touch them beyond what's appropriate. An adult puts off training, balks at requirements, or seemingly tries to get away with breaking basic 2-person leadership guidelines.
Yeah.
If you see any of these should be red flags and that concern you. And you should trust your instincts if you see a red flag.
Yes. The list is actually longer. We've got even more. So I bet this will be the ones we're thinking of. Tim, you want to read these?
An adult singles out a scout by teasing, bullying, or negging them. An adult talks about parents, guardians, or for example, I bet your mom wouldn't let you do that. Or an adult responds angrily or dismissive when talking about consent. Or an adult has broken your trust for any reason.
I think your would have been the scout's trust, I guess.
Yeah. I haven't had personal experience with this, but I certainly know of true stories that have been reported in the newspaper from other scouting organizations where the scout leader would take a bunch of male scouts into a cabin for the weekend and say, oh, let's watch some movies that your parents normally wouldn't let you watch. And try and appeal to the young boys as if they are grown-ups or as if they have a knowledge about the world that their parents don't understand yet. Huge red flag, obviously.
Right. All right. Any other?
You had something to add.
Did Sarah? I didn't have anything. I'm good.
No, I'm good.
Okay.
No, I was going to say the adult broken your trust. I mean, I think that even goes for a co-leader to just, raise the flag up. If it doesn't have to be from a kid's perspective.
I guess that's true. Yeah. If somebody is, if you trust them to be your 2-person too deep leadership and they can't be trusted to do that.
Right. You see something goofy. Yeah.
All right.
The thing about, I had it and I lost it. Coming back, hang on. I think there's a really common, easy feeling of like, oh, but I know that person. Like, I know Jim, he's not trying to break the rule.
Mm-hmm.
I know Jim has good intentions, but if Jim has good intentions, we should agree about this safety policy and we should be doing our best to follow it. Right. Now, of course, there was something on the previous slide about consistently breaking the rules. Like, everybody has a moment where like, oh my God, I didn't even think of it. Like I just called my kid because I had his number and I needed to remind him that I had his backpack, or like, there's a difference between slipping of the mind and like, oh, I forgot again. Oh, I forgot again.
Yes.
Or I don't think that's important because I have good intentions.
Mm-hmm.
The real good intention means that you would bother to follow the policy and the rules to make sure that the good intentions can always be followed through and not get into that place.
And to that point, if somebody responds angrily or dismissively when you have to remind them about a policy, that's something that you should take a second look at too. I know in meetings, I get wound up in my agenda and things going into chaos, and the scouts having a good old time and just trying to keep them, from shooting each other with bows and arrows or something. But if I let the rule slip, I'm counting on my co-leaders and the other non-registered adults to remind me, hey, there's boundaries here. Make sure you get consent and make sure you're following the rules. Right. And I will say, thank you for reminding me.
Yes.
And if anybody isn't accepting of the kind of coaching that we need to do for each other, then we're going to keep an eye on that.
Right.
Now, if either your car salesman or your scout co-leader says, "What, don't you trust me?"
Red flag. I should put that in there. This is another bullet point. All right. So recognizing abuse. So abuse obviously manifests in several forms, and that we've just broken them down here specifically. I mean, there's real obvious ones. We know what physical abuse looks like. It's harming a person physically. We know what sexual abuse looks like, at least, but it might not look like the same thing. There's a lot of education to be done here. I know that this is not a training meant to make you a social worker. I can't give you that now. But what we can talk about are the different kinds of abuse that these red flags might lead to, and things that might cause suspicion in when we're trying to protect our scouts. So neglect is simple as depriving a youth of food, clothing, shelter, medical care, and other essential necessities. I have unfortunately seen this happen a little bit in our community, not in our scout group, but it does happen. Physical abuse, intentional physical injury to a child by someone responsible for their care, and we're all responsible for their care. So sexual abuse is forcing a child to perform sexual acts. Emotional abuse is ongoing intimidation, harassment, belittlement, disparaging comments, hate language, ridicule, humiliation, regular blame, continuously being picked on by peers, and bullying. And I think the kids actually nowadays get a much better education about bullying than I ever did in my school. Mm-hmm. And some people may recognize this behavior in their own lives. And we just can't let it happen in scouts, and scout to scout or adult to scout. It's easy enough to stop it when it's scout to scout because you're the boss of the scout group, but it's harder when it's another adult that is perhaps intimidating or frightening a kid. So these are the things we need to look for. And there's probably more than this, but these are probably from a reference that, will help us get started recognizing. So reporting abuse, when we recognize these things or we have suspicions, the policy of OSG is that if any child has been harmed, assaulted, harassed, or is in any other danger, you report it immediately. It is our duty to report abuse to authorities immediately without first notifying your Scoutmaster or regional national OSG staff. If you are worried, file a report. You contact your Scoutmaster when this report is filed, and they will notify regional and national staff. There's no need to stop yourself from reporting or ask anyone else for advice about reporting. You are responsible we ask you to document all circumstances, the scenario, what you observed. If other children were present or talking about the incident, write down what they've said. A lot of this is documentation. I personally have not experienced anything like this, but my guess is that, as with all legal issues, documentation is going to serve you best. Yes, Jeff.
So there's a few points I always like to highlight here that I think are really important. First of all, if you suspect abuse, you should report it, because we're not, as Vicki said on the last slide, we're not trained to know for sure if a child is being abused. But by reporting it, you're putting it in the hands of people who are trained to investigate and make that distinction. You're not doing anything wrong, and that child is not going to be taken away from their parents because of some misunderstanding, just because you called Child Protective Services or a statewide organization. If it is our expectation and responsibility that if you suspect something, you will report it. The second point that Vicki raises here about not first notifying your Scoutmaster or regional or national OSG staff is because we don't want any possibility or even the perception of a possibility that somebody would encourage you to not file a report if you think a child is being abused. We never want to be in a position where people think that national leadership or regional leadership or local leadership are covering up for somebody. We want you to report, and that is our policy. Don't look to Vicki, should I report? Don't look to me, should I report? Don't look to Amber, should I report? If you think you suspect abuse, you should report it.
Mm-hmm.
The reason we ask you to contact your group scoutmaster after reporting might seem a little contradictory, but because if there is a reasonable fear that there is a situation that is actively happening, there may be a need to remove that leader from actively being given access to youth while that investigation is performed. Mm-hmm. We're not going to perform the investigation, but of course we want to limit any possibility of further harm coming to any children. Mm-hmm. That's why the policy is worked out this way. And so I think it's really important to understand the logic behind it, because I think it makes a lot more sense when you think about it that way.
I would like to think that any parent who is suspicious, or I should say I would like to think that I would not react violently if someone reported me and I had to answer questions to, what do they call it? Department of Human Services. If I had to answer questions, I would like to think that in the moment I would understand that something was a misunderstanding and that was not a vindictive thing. Like, as I would rather have to answer questions to a government agency than for people to turn aside if there were something more important, more scary going on, essentially. And so that kind of leads into the next slide, which is, from my research, again, Pennsylvania is very specific about this. They were specific about the background checks required for you to work with children as a volunteer. They also are very specific that anyone who works who volunteers with an organization with children is considered a mandatory reporter. So that doesn't mean that me as the leader, on paper, as the 64th Brandywine representative, is the mandatory reporter. It means every volunteer is a mandatory reporter. So even a non-Rover adult scout volunteer is a mandatory reporter. So I want each Rover leader and each volunteer to feel the independence and the ability to go to report whatever suspicions they have at any time without having to discuss it with me. You don't need to come to me, don't come to me. So this is a little snippet from the Scout, or from the PA law that says a person, paid or unpaid, who is on the basis of the person's role in a program, activity, or service, is a person responsible for a child's welfare or has direct contact with children. So basically anybody who has direct contact with children is a mandatory reporter. So on the next screen, I have information about how to do a report. So there's an 800 number to make your report. There is also a portal that you can log into and do a report online. And the PA Department of Human Services, the page that I link here, specifically says, here's what you do and here's the information we need. The other thing that they said, it says here, when making a report of suspected child abuse or general child well-being concerns, it is important to provide as much information as possible. Do not assume that a call to DHS will result in immediate action, removal, consequence, etc. You are merely reporting what you found, leaving the work to the professionals in the area. Now, I also discovered that mandatory reporting in Pennsylvania is not anonymous. You must give your name and a contact number because you may be asked to answer questions in the future to fill out the report that is done by DHS. So I know some states do allow anonymous reporting, but Pennsylvania does not. So, so everybody who takes on the responsibility as a Rover or as a volunteer in our group has to also take on that responsibility to watch out for the children. So.
If we're in a camp out in Maryland,
mm-hmm.
How does that jurisdiction fall? We're registered in Pennsylvania.
That's a really good question.
I just thought of it as you're going through that.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, you know what? I never thought if for some reason it occurred in Delaware where we just did our, river.
You're not safe in Delaware, Jim. Children in any part of the tri-state area.
I know, Cecil County, Delaware, New Jersey. Lord, where would we go?
I know I'm not safe in Cecil County. I know that.
I imagine as our group is a Pennsylvania registered group, Pennsylvania law would probably govern our group and all our well, that's not true. I was going to say all of our Scout members are from Pennsylvania,
Right.
not. There's some from Delaware.
Delaware and
We
Maryland.
would report in Pennsylvania, and in the details of the report, you specify the location and the time and the people that it happens. And there's
Okay.
reciprocity between the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services and Child Protective Services and the bordering states. They cooperate with the investigations as required. But because we're a 503C and registered in Pennsylvania, that's where our mandatory reporting responsibilities lie.
That makes sense.
Thank you. That makes sense. Thank you.
I've given you about all the information I have about this. I'm not a professional, but I think that given all this research, I think it's pretty clear what our responsibility is. So if anybody has any further questions about it, I can point you to the right websites and I can try and help you answer the questions. So we are now at our conclusion. So we've talked about a lot of things that are difficult and make a lot of, and they may change a little bit of the way what we behave. These are all our policies and we need to follow the letter as much as we can. And then sometimes that means that activities have to change. You know, we can't have a meeting if there aren't two leaders. We can't let our suspicions lie.
Yeah.
So anyway, I have a discussion here. If you have any questions about what's asked of you or what your role might be as a leader, we're all leaders and volunteers, but we're also parents. So
I think you cut out, Victoria.
no, I stopped because my thought sort of trickled off there. I'm going to turn into a pumpkin suit. It's late for me.
No, I think this was a good overview and refresher. You know, these are difficult topics, and I'm really, again, it reaffirms that I'm glad to be a part of this organization, to hear these discussions and to hear not just our organization's, you know, the 64th Brandywine, but the whole, you know, national organization's position on these things really make me happy and safe with my kids, even if I weren't a direct part of the organization. You know, and I think that's something that we really should take pride in.
Yeah, and as someone coming in new, like, it's, you know, this was a great primer, I would say, to build off of. Sorry, my kid's just going bonkers in the background.
That's all right. It's fun.
It is.
Well, if anybody has anything else to share, any other resources, please, you know, let us know. This is, I mean, I've not done this thoroughly myself before, other than being a part of BTC, when it's usually sort of a roundtable discussion. It's not quite as formal as this. But I think that this kind of refresher, like I said, I think this might be a little more helpful to people long-term to get everybody to buy in, rather than just handing them, hey, reread the youth safety guidelines this week. Yeah.
I'll throw out two additional resources, which are two additional people. The national organization has a national safety commissioner who sits on the board. Her name is Jenna. She's lovely. She lives in Virginia.
She actually helped me a bit with this presentation.
She is a trained professional and has worked with children and is trained in some amount of social work and working with kids with special needs and is PMC. And she and our California commissioner, Dan Bixler, who also works professionally as a family therapist and a family services counselor, have worked out a mediation process. Now, this does not supersede our duty to report to the local authorities. This is additional tools to looking at the safety policy and having questions, feeling uncomfortable about something and wanting to discuss it. Even post-reporting, I mean, I can tell you that if I had to report suspected sexual abuse going on between anyone and anyone, I would be distraught. And I cannot offer you tremendous professional services, but I can say that Gemma and Dan would be available, would definitely make themselves available. I don't think any of the rest of you know them. So
I have met Gemma at training once, I believe.
Yeah. So it's kind of a neutral third party situation where they would be happy to that's all I can offer as a national organization.
For example, if you were to question, this hopefully will never happen, but
right.
if you were to question the way that Vicky or I, as the regional commissioner, were interpreting youth safety protocols, and they were making you uncomfortable, those two would be great resources for that discussion, for example.
Or if you had to report something going on and you were having a hard time shaking your own personal emotions about it, they would make themselves available to help, like, process and think about it and just download as a somewhat impartial and somewhat neutral, like, third party person who's a professional and knows a little bit more than the rest of us.
But again, report first.
Yes, report.
Yes. All right. Well, I apologize for going a little long. I'll practice getting it tighter, and maybe we can get that tight 60-minute meeting that we all, ideally strive for.
I think this discussion is so valuable. It's not worth rushing, in my opinion. This is one of the more humbling things to hear about and understand. It's stuff you don't think about, never want to think about, but you need to when you're doing this kind of thing. So no, thank you for walking us through it, Vicky. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim.
Yep, definitely. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. And this presentation and the video, I'm going to shut it off now if I can figure out how. No, that's not going to do it. Wait, stop recording. Okay, bye all.